My name is Dalton L. Townsend. I'm in Knoxville, Tennessee today. It's July 23, 2007, and we are interviewing Robert R. Campbell of Knoxville. This interview is taking place as a part of the Legal History Project of the Fellows of the Tennessee Bar Foundation. Bob, would you give me your full name, please?
Robert Roe Campbell, R-O-E.
And you were born when and where?
I was born November 7th, 1930 at Fort Sanders Hospital in Knoxville, Tennessee.
Born and raised in Knoxville?
Yes.
Before we start talking about your legal career, I'd like to ask you some questions about your youth and your upbringing and your family. First of all, tell us about your grandparents.
Well, my grandparents on my mother's side were Dr. and Mrs. Horace Cady Wilson, C-A-D-Y. My grandfather was born and raised in Maysville, Kentucky, right on the banks of the Ohio River. And he became a Presbyterian minister, went to Center College undergraduate school and to the Louisville Theological Seminary. And he had 3 pastorates, Lansing, Michigan, Aurora, Illinois, and Mishawaka, Indiana, and then, not in that order, but then he came to the Second Presbyterian Church in Knoxville. And that's where my mother and my father got together. My grandmother, on my mother's side, was born and raised in Mishawaka, Indiana. And when my grandfather took a pastorate there, that's when he met my grandmother. And they married and were married forever. That is pretty much a summary of my mother's parents. I should add, because this may be more significant later, but my grandmother on my mother's side, her maiden name was Tromp, T-R-O-M-P, which is 100% Dutch. And her parents were Dutch. Her father was in some sort of industry up there. On my father's side, my grandfather, Campbell, was a country doctor and a farmer. And my father was born in Washington County, Tennessee, in the Limestone area. And not long after his birth, they moved to Greene County, where my grandfather set up a medical practice and also had a farm. And so my father grew up in a farming environment, a sure enough farming environment where he worked the farm, and he used to say that in the summertime they never wore shoes, and he said that the bottom of the soles of his feet got so tough that he wore out his shoes from the inside when he started wearing shoes in the cooler weather. My grandmother, Campbell, was Swiss and Scots-Irish. I'm not real sure where she was born, but she had kinfolk, and still some kinfolk, in the Buffett Mill area of Knox County, the Spring Place area, because I think maybe her mother was a Buffett, if I'm not mistaken. She was as much a farmer as my dad and my grandfather were, because she loved to work in the farm. I mean, she had an aunt who was a widow, a sister who was a widow that did the inside work, and my grandmother would do the outside work, like wringing the necks of chickens to have for Sunday dinner and that sort of thing. When my dad was about 6 years old, as many people did back in those days, my grandfather loaded up his family, his wife and his 5 children, and they headed west, and lived for about 6 or 8 years in Sunnyside, Washington, where they did some farming and went to school. And then the call of East Tennessee brought them back to East Tennessee, and they spent the rest of my growing up years or their growing up years in Greene County, in the Tusculum area, right out beyond Tusculum College. So those are my grandparents.
Your father, I know, was very special to you. You were raised in what part of Knoxville?
I was raised in the Westmoreland Heights section, out in West Knoxville, at a time when Westmoreland, which is now a huge residential development, was just getting started. We, before World War II, we might have had one neighbor that we could see from where we were, and my father, in keeping with his farming background, we had a big garden. We raised chickens and guineas, and we always had 2 or 3 dogs. And then after World War II, the development took off there at Westmoreland Heights. They had an auction of the property. You could buy a lot for $350 in Westmoreland Heights back then.
Before we talked about your parents, I understand when you lived in Westmoreland area, there was some interest of history in that area. You want to tell us about those?
Yeah, we lived on what's now was and still is Stone Mill Road, and behind us on a hill that goes down to what was then Ebenezer Road, is now called Westland Drive, were some old Indian mounds, and then a little further down were the remains of some Civil War trenches, and we would play on those, and we just took them for granted. We didn't think anything about them. The only thing that we used to compete for with neighbor kids was occasionally we'd find arrowheads in digging around the Indian mounds, and we never found any evidence of Civil War battles, but the trenches were there, very clearly there.
I assume those were prepared in conjunction with the Battle of Knoxville.
I would assume. I don't know.
Tell us about your father, what he did for a living, and what you recall about him as you were growing up. I know he was a very special man.
My dad, his schooling started in country schools in Greene County, and then he went to some sort of almost a prep school level education at Tusculum College, and he was a good athlete. And they lured him to the University of Tennessee to play sports, and he, thinking time-wise, he was there in 1921, 21, and 22, and in 1924, and I can explain that gap in a moment, but he was an outstanding athlete: football, basketball, and baseball. He was captain of all 3 teams at UT, and actually was all Southern, I think, in baseball and football when the conference was what is now the Southeastern and the Atlantic Coast Conference. He had an opportunity when he was finishing his college career to sign with the old Boston Braves of the National League, Major Leagues, and he I don't remember whether he signed or whether he decided not to do it. He would play semi-pro ball. An interesting story there is that when he was in college, in the summertime, he would play a semi-pro ball. One summer he played in a semi-pro team in Andalusia, Alabama. And one of his teammates was a semi-pro college student from Vanderbilt named Robert Love Taylor. later federal judge here in Knoxville. And because they didn't want to impair their eligibility, they played under assumed names, and my dad's full name was Lacey Rowe Campbell. And he played under the name of Lacey Rowe, and Judge Taylor played under the name of Bobby Love. And they played one summer down there in Andalusia and picked up a few dollars, and then came back to school. And following up on that, Ray Jenkins became aware of that situation long ago, and he used to claim that he was going to report them to the authorities and strip them of their medals the same way they did Jim Thorpe in his Olympic medals. But then Daddy went to work in a banking institution up in Chicago. I can't remember the name of it. And in 1923, I probably have the years right, they needed another good running back at UT, so they lured him to come back to school for another year. Back then, the NCAA didn't, if there was such a thing, they weren't too strict. So he came back and played another year of football. He always told me it was the worst mistake he'd ever made because it interrupted his career in business and didn't gain him anything. So he finished that career. Then he went with the Fidelity Bankers Trust Company, building still there on Gay Street, and was there for all of his career except during World War II. During World War II, he was fortunate in that he was too young for World War I, but a little too old for World War II, so he wasn't in the military. But he took a leave from the Fidelity Bankers Trust Company because he was in the mortgage loan department, and there just wasn't much activity in that during the war, and went with the War Production Board, which was a government agency which had some responsibilities for regulating and prioritizing war production. And then came back with the Fidelity Bankers Trust Company after that, and then the Fidelity Bankers Trust Company was acquired by the old Valley Fidelity Bank, and he finished his career there. Daddy always told me that if he had it to do over again, he would have taken the opportunity to go into business for himself, as he had some opportunities, but having been traumatized, as many in that era were, over the Depression, World War I, the Depression, World War II, he wasn't willing to take the risk, and so he stayed as an employee of a bank his whole career, and he did it very well. He excelled at what he was doing. He never made any money. He probably made more money when he started drawing Social Security than he'd ever made when he was actually working. He was a very determined individual. He built a tennis court for me when he was about 50 years old and started taking up tennis and became addicted to it. He was the primary mover that resulted in the construction and development of the Knoxville Racquet Club. And in fact, they named the center court up there the L. Campbell Center Court. And he started the senior tour, U.S. Lawn Tennis Association and U.S. Tennis Association now, but the U.S. Lawn Tennis Association started a tournament for those as old as 55 and then 60 and 65, and Daddy was primarily responsible for getting that started, and he played tennis until he was about 85 years old, and he was very much addicted to the game, to the point where, as a result of all of the wear and tear that he'd gotten in his wrist by being a catcher in baseball, and by playing football back in the days when they weren't protected and didn't have the training facilities, he had terrible arthritis in his wrist, and to the extent where doctors told him that he really shouldn't play anymore because there was just too much pain with the movement of his wrist. But he found a doctor, Dr. Vernon Young, who suggested they could fuse the wrist so that there wasn't movement in it, and it would avoid the pain, but it would make his wrist with no movement. So this is a true story, was written up in Time magazine. He went to the morning of surgery and he took a tennis racket with him. And he told Dr. Young that he wanted it fused in that position, his forehand grip. And so that's what they did. And boy, he had a heck of a forehand after he had that done. Daddy was a good man, and he was, in some respects, I claim, part of the greatest generation that Tom Brokaw writes about, because he weathered the storms of the Depression, the war, and everything that was involved with that, and was able, with the help of his wife, my mother, who taught school, was able to provide for the education of two boys.
Your mother, you mentioned that she was a school teacher. Tell us about her.
She taught.
And give me her name first.
Her name was Anita, A-N-I-T-A, Anita Wilson Campbell. Her father was a preacher, and she and my dad met when they were both here at UT. And my brother was born in 1928, and I was born in 1930. And probably when we got up junior high or high school age, she started teaching school. She taught at the old Bearden Elementary School there on Kingston Pike. And her teaching, as I recall, was the grammar school level, first, second, third grade, maybe the fourth grade, something like that. She taught there for years, and then went to Rocky Hill School in the Rocky Hill community of West Knox County, and taught there. Gosh, I don't know how long she taught, but I'd say that she probably taught until my brother and I, he's a little older than I am, my brother and I finished our college education. And she was a fine lady who had an inherent goodness about her, and boy, she worked hard. She was an old-fashioned housewife where she did all the cleaning and all the cooking, and then when she finished the cooking and dinner and everything at night, 8 or 9 o'clock, she'd sit up and grade papers till 12 or 1 o'clock in the morning, and then get up and go to school and start it all over again.
My mother also was a grammar school teacher, so I know who it was.
Yeah.
I recall that your mother had a bad stroke later on in life.
Yeah, she did. It was in 1977. I remember it well because I can't remember. It was in October, I think, of 1977. She was getting dressed to go somewhere and just keeled over, and they took her to the St. Mary's Hospital, and it was diagnosed as a severe stroke. Of course, I remember it, but also remember that I had a major product liability trial set the day after that in federal court here in Knoxville. And this was one time when I think my father's relationship with Judge Taylor was helpful, because I called Judge Taylor's clerk. I don't remember whether it was Carl Sawpaw or whether it was Don Ferguson, and told him what happened and told him that I just didn't feel like I could be up to trying a case. And he said, well, wait just a minute. And he put me on hold and came back in a few minutes, says, that's okay, the judge's taking care of it for me. So she was, for 11 years, she was confined either to bed or, for the most part, to a wheelchair. And My dad still continued to play tennis some, but his main priority was taking care of my mother, which was a hard thing to do because constant changes of sitters and those sorts of things. And she gradually got worse and worse, and finally in March of 1988, she passed away.
My recollection's correct. Your dad basically spent the last few years of his life primarily taking care of your mother.
That was it, and as frequently happens in that kind of a situation, she died in March and he died in December.
I recall.
That's
You talked about your brother. Tell us a little bit about him.
my brother John Wilson Campbell, is a physician, and he was educated at a time when you could go for 2 years in undergraduate school at UT and then go to medical school. And that's what he did, went to UT Medical School. And he, of course, went through his residency as a family practitioner. He had military service in the Air Force, came back and practiced as a family practitioner for a short period of time, and then decided that he wanted to specialize, so he went back for training as a ear, nose, and throat, otolaryngology, I guess they call it now, ear, nose, and throat specialist, and came back, and I don't know what year that was, but I'm pretty sure that he was the first otolaryngologist in the Knoxville area to use the microscopic procedures for inner ear surgery, that sort of thing, and has had a real successful career. And as a matter of fact, at his age of, he'll be 79 tomorrow, and he still goes to the office a couple of half days a week. He closed his own practice. He goes to another office, and I tell him that the reason he still has a lot of old patients is that he's never succeeded in getting them well, but he's still practicing and still very much alert, busy.
I recall that he removed a polyp from one of my children's ears one time, and
Yeah.
the fee was $30.
Yeah, I had a hard time for getting John to charge enough. He gave a lot of free services to people that could afford to pay, but that was the way he wanted to do it.
Well, I was a young lawyer at that time, so
Mm-hmm.
maybe it was appropriate.
Mm-hmm.
I also recall that he was a very gentle man.
Had a marvelous bedside manner. He loved to work with children in tonsillectomies, adenoids, and all of the ear problems that children have all the time.
Where did you go to school as a boy and as a adolescent and in high school?
Who me?
You, yes,
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Well, I started school at Sequoia School. We lived in Westmoreland Heights, which was in the county. And I went the first 3 years at Sequoia School, which was a city school. And then after the first 3 years, I moved out to Bearden. The reason being that my parents were, for me to be in a city school, we had to pay tuition, which was something like $75 a year, but back in those days that was significant, and so my parents decided that I could go to a county school and they wouldn't have to bear the financial burden of paying tuition. And so I went to Bearden in the 4th grade and went through the 9th grade at Bearden, and that was at that time Bearden was a true country school. When I started school in the fall of the 4th grade, whatever year that was, there were boys who came to school in overalls and barefooted, and it was a true country school. And I went there through the 9th grade, and then my parents decided that my brother and I both should go back to a city school where they felt we would get a better education. So I went to Knoxville High School, the old Knoxville High School, for the 3 years in high school. At that time, junior high was the 7th, 8th, and 9th grade, and high school was 10, 11, and 12. So I went to Knoxville High School for those 3 years. Graduated Knoxville High School.
And where did you go to college, your undergraduate?
Well, I went to the University of Tennessee, and naturally that was what you did in those days. And there wasn't such a thing as ACT tests and aptitude tests for college admission, and you just went over and signed up. And I went to UT for my undergraduate school, and I started out in just the College of Business. And as I went along, I decided that I kind of eliminated other things, science, engineering, and those sorts of things, probably because I wasn't smart enough to deal in those esoteric subjects. So I decided that maybe I'd just try to go to law school. And so after 3 years, in those days you could go 3 years undergrad and 3 years law school and get 2 degrees. So
now, while you were an undergraduate student, did you participate in any varsity sports?
I was on the tennis team.
Okay.
I participated a lot in intramural sports other than tennis, although at one point I did play intramural tennis. I can't remember just exactly how that worked into things, but I was on the tennis team for a couple of years, maybe 3 years.
And you lettered in tennis?
I lettered in tennis. I was at the bottom of the ladder, but I played enough matches to get a letter, and enjoyed it. Enjoyed it very much.
I understand you had some fairly well-known fellow tennis players, at least one.
Yes, I did.
Tell us about them.
Well, John Cullum was one. John is, even today, he's my age, but today he's very active on Broadway and has won several Emmy Awards for On a Clear Day You Can See Forever. He played Richard Burton's backup in Camelot. And I think the roles that he is in now are non-singing roles, but he has an excellent singing voice in his younger years.
You ever keep up with him?
Not really. Another one of our teammates was Gavin Gentry, who was a very successful lawyer in Memphis with the Armstrong firm there. And Gavin and John were close friends and teammates. And Gavin died a couple of years ago, and I was called his wife, Mary Jane, or somebody on her behalf called me and asked me to notify 2 or 3 people of Gavin's death, and one of them was John Cullum. And I didn't get John directly, but indirectly I got word to him. So I haven't talked to John Cullum in probably 10 or 15 years. Another one of my teammates was Tommy Bartlett, who was probably the best athlete, all-around athlete that Knoxville ever had in high school, and played tennis and basketball at the University of Tennessee. And he coached at Lenore City High School, at Murray High School in Dandridge, and for a time he coached basketball at the University of Florida. And he was an assistant to Ray Mears before he went to Florida. And then after that, he went back to Chattanooga and spent the rest of his career running a tennis center, the Manker Patton Tennis Center in Chattanooga. And I think he's probably retired now, but because he's a couple years older than I am.
Bob, I know that you, particularly in your college time, had a lot of friends who have remained your friends even today. Do you want to tell us about some of your closest friends that that you developed in that friendship that you developed in that period, and where they are now, and what they're doing?
I was blessed by my friendships, and still am, that we developed in college, and some of it carrying over from Knoxville High School. I pledged Sigma Chi fraternity, which was came naturally for me because my father was a Sigma Chi. I had two uncles who were Sigma Chi's. I had a brother who's a Sigma Chi, and now I have two sons who were Sigma Chi, are now two sons who were Sigma Chi's, and now a grandson who's a Sigma Chi. So Sigma Chi is kind of in our blood. And it was there, but beyond the fraternity, that we developed a circle of friends that just happened out of literally good fortune. We apparently had a lot in common, and had similar objective for our lives, and those friendships have continued over the years. David McWhorter was one of my close friends. David suddenly, with a virulent form of cancer, died last year. And David was very successful in the real estate development and management business. His children are now involved in that, a very successful business. Jimmy Smith was one of my fraternity brothers, and literally a longtime friend back as a neighbor in Westmoreland Heights. And Jimmy been very successful in the banking business. He, I think, even by those who may have wondered about Knoxvillians coming to Nashville, he gets a lot of credit for pulling the First American Bank out of the ditch back years ago. Jim Haslam, who was a fraternity brother of mine, who was a captain of the UT football team, and in August of 1958, when I was just barely practicing law, Jim decided to go into business for himself, and so I, in my neophyte way, incorporated Pilot Oil Corporation. I think Jim was able to scrape up $30,000 or $40,000 as a capital investment, and it's no secret that I think Pilot will probably gross 12 or 13 billion with a B this year.
Have you continued to represent him in our firm?
Even up until today, yeah, we've represented them through all of their renditions. Hank Berlekamp, who was an SAE, but a good friend, I got to know him. And Hank has been a real close friend, a neighbor, ever since college days. And his family, his son, his older son, Bert, his only son, Bert, was a same age as my son, Bobby, Robert R. Jr. And they grew up together, played basketball together at Bearden. So Hank Berlekamp is a close friend. There's a number of others that Lewis Howard, who was a successful lawyer here in town, still a very close friend. We feel very fortunate that we've had so many good close friends who've stayed together, and we think, and this sounds a little immodest, but I think that our group has made some real contributions to this community.
And they have. Tell us, before you talk about your law school endeavors, was there any particular reason that you decided to go to law school? That is, did you know some lawyers that might have played a role in that decision, or just something you did on your own?
You know, a lot of these young people have a burning desire to be a lawyer, to practice law or to change the world. I never had that. I'm backtracking here a little bit, but Gavin Gentry's, my lawyer friend from Memphis, who passed away, his mother taught me 8th grade English at Bearden School. His dad was with the Knoxville City School System, and his dad was one of the pioneers in developing vocational testing. And when I was in junior high school, even though I was at a county school, they used some of Mr. Gentry, Curtis Gentry's vocational testing, and I took that test a couple of times, and always my strongest field was in English and public speaking. And I didn't like science. I took a year of accounting at UT and hated every minute of it. I made A's, but I hated every minute of it. And so, to be honest with you, the idea of being a lawyer was kind of by a process of elimination. And after my 3 years of undergraduate school, unlike what you can do in today's world, I walked across the street and signed up and went to law school.
Let me digress. I understand that one of your friends put a nickname on you somewhere along the line. You want to tell us about that?
Yeah, my old friend Sam McCamey, rest his soul, somewhere back in my college days, Sam got the idea that I had a big nose. And so he started calling me Beak. And that name has stuck ever since. Beak, Beaks, Beaky. And my friends, many of them still call me that in impolite company.
I've had the pleasure of being in that company a few times. Well, tell us about your, I know you split law school because of the Army, but tell us what you recall about at least the first 2 years of law school.
My first 2 years, I have a very clear recollection, and you will remember Professor Dick Knoll at the law school, a fairly renowned teacher and writer in torts. I can still remember sitting in his class probably within the first week I was in law school. And I remembered, suddenly it just hit me that I didn't have a business to go into. My parents didn't have anything that would open any doors for me other than a good name as far as business or law or anything else. And I said to myself, you know, if I'm going to get anywhere, I got to get serious. I'd kind of played my way through my first 3 years in college and made decent grades. But I thought I'd better get serious. So I really bore down my first 2 years in law school. Here again, my grades weren't all that good, something like a 3.25 or something like that.
That was pretty good back then.
It was pretty good back then. It wasn't the top of the class, but it was certainly, I felt like it was pretty good. I had the idea, I was in ROTC, and I can't remember exactly how I could do it, but I was aware that it was within my power to continue law school and then go on active duty in the military, which I knew I was going to need to do, or go earlier. I decided that I would go on active duty after my second year of law school. My reasoning was that I felt like that I would have a better chance of finding employment in the law coming directly out of law school as opposed to coming directly out of active duty in the Army. As it turned out, it didn't really matter, but So I went on active duty in the military in the summer of 1953, and spent 22 months, I think, on active duty in the military, and then came back and finished law school.
I'll talk about your military in just a moment. Somewhere along the line, I understand you met a lady named Ruth Vermeulen.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You want to tell us how that came about?
Yeah, when I went into the Army in the summer of '53 on active duty at Fort Eustis, Virginia, and was there and at maneuvers at Fort Bragg, and then I got orders to go to Korea. This was in 1954, and the ceasefire in the Korean War took effect in August of 1953, so the major hostilities were not going on over there at that time. I got orders for Korea, and to be honest with you, I volunteered, not out of any heroic motivation, but I was single, and I said, if I'm going to have this time, then I might as well travel a little bit and see the world. And I knew that if I volunteered for Europe or some plush place like that, that I wouldn't get it, so I volunteered for the Far East. And in my pre-embarkation leave, I was at a vacation home that my parents had on the shores of Lake Michigan. And there, I say a home, it was a small cottage, and Ruth Vermeulen's family had a cottage just a short distance, maybe 75, 100 yards from my family's cottage. And one night while I was on pre-embarkation leave, we went to a resort hotel just down the beach from where our place was, and Ruth was waiting on tables there, a place where I had worked a couple of years earlier. And she waited on us, and my children are aghast at the fact that we would create a relationship there literally in a matter of 4 or 5 days before I went overseas, and then we continued to correspond, and the rest is history. Yeah. Summer romance.
Before we come back to Ruth and the after effects of that relationship, tell us a little bit more about your military service, if you will.
Okay. I went to Korea. Before I went to Korea, as I said, I was at Fort Bragg. I participated in the first nuclear maneuvers of the military. It's called Exercise Flashburn. I was involved in those maneuvers at Fort Bragg, and then got my orders for Korea and went home sometime that summer for leave before I went overseas. And I went to Korea and was assigned to the 3rd Transportation Rail Command, which was headquartered in Seoul. And one of the units of the 3rd TRC was the 724th Transportation Railway Operating Battalion, which was stationed in Busan. So I landed after 15 days at sea, landed in Busan, and went to a replacement depot and was put on a train to go to Seoul to report to the 3rd TRC, and got up there and was told that I was going to be assigned to the 724th in Busan, so I turned around and took another train back to Busan. And I was there I got there, I think it was late July of '54, and was there until late May of '55, when we got an early release instead of the full 24 months. We got out a little earlier, and I was in a railway operating battalion, and I had about 14 different assignments, none of which had anything to do with operating the railroads. I was club officer, I was troop information and education officer. I was special service officer. I was fire marshal. And I did all of those additional duties. You've been in the military and you know that you get orders saying in addition to your other duties you will do this. I had all of those so the other guys could operate the railroad. Came back in, was discharged in June of 55 and went back to law school.
Did you have to, did you have reserve duty, which was required at that time?
Yeah, I had to serve, I can't remember how many years I had to serve. My date of rank was, I think, June something of 1953, and I can't remember whether I had to serve 4 years or what, but I actually served more than that. I served in the reserve primarily just for the money, and I got up to 9 years, 9.5 years, and I decided that if I got beyond 10 years, I'd be tempted to stay until I got retirement, and I didn't want to be tempted to do that, so that's when I resigned from the reserve.
Have you ever been back to the Far East? Or?
No, I haven't. I'd often thought that I'd like to go back to Korea, Pusan, and see where it was we were stationed, but I had a houseboy who, Song Eun Kong, who just came to our unit there in Pusan with nothing but the clothes on his back. He escaped from the north when the North Korea invaded the south, left his family and came down and slept we had a little Quonset hut for an officers club, and he slept in a cot behind a little bar, and he tended bar and helped serve meals, and he would clean up and things like that, and I kept up with him. And about 15 years ago, he said he and his wife were coming to America to visit. Since he left there, he worked his way back to Seoul and got a civilian job with the Post Exchange, the U.S. Post Exchange program. Got married, had 4 children. And he and Sunja came over and visited with him, and we spent 2 or 3 days together. And in the course of that visit, I told Kong that someday I'd like to go back to Korea and see the place where we were, and he said he could tell me that a couple of years earlier he'd gone back to Pusan from Seoul, and he said he couldn't find the place where we were. And so I concluded that if he couldn't find it, I sure wouldn't be able to find it, because that whole situation had changed. When we were there, both Seoul and Pusan and the whole countryside were just devastated. There wasn't a building over 2 stories tall anywhere that I saw. Now it's a major industrial city. And so I don't have any plans to go back. I spent time there, and of course we spent a week or 10 days in R&R in Tokyo, Japan, and if I'm going to travel, it's other places now.
After your leaving active duty, as I understand, you came back and finished law school.
Came back and finished law school, and I found out that it was difficult to generate the same focus that I had before I went away. I blame a little bit of it, not 100% by any means. I blame a little bit on it that the professors had kind of forgotten about me, and I had to try to renew a reputation of someone who was serious about his law studies. And so my last year of law school was not very successful. I graduated from law school, and this may be of some encouragement to young law student persons who want to succeed in the law, but I think I graduated with about a 2.4 or 2.5 grade point average, and I enjoy meeting occasionally with some new, young, fresh-faced lawyers who are seeking employment in our law firm. And I tell them that I graduated fourth in my class, and they say that is really wonderful, or maybe fifth in my class. They really think that's great. And then I tell them we only had 11 in the class, and it gives them a little bit of insight into the environment that we were in back then. But I got through it, and with the help of a couple of really first-class professors that were very helpful to me over there.
Who were some of your favorite professors?
Well, Colonel Warner, we called him. He was later Dean Warner, and he was a true. Without him, I may not have withstood the stress of trying to be a lawyer after I got out of law school, because he encouraged me. I can still remember him telling me that if you want to practice law, you can practice law and you can be successful at it, but you've got to use shoe leather, take the opportunities that come along, don't be too picky, and get into the system and do your very best where you are, and you will succeed. And another one who, of course, Dean Warner's deceased now, and so is Forrest Lacey, who I was there first or second quarter that he was at law school, and he was a good guy, and he taught contracts and I don't know what else, and
Commercial courses. Tough exams.
Yeah, and he was tough, but he was fair, and I was really able to learn from his teaching over there. So.
When did you and Ruth marry?
We got married on July the 7th, 1956. I graduated from law school and about 3 weeks, maybe 4 weeks later, took the bar exam, and 2 weeks later got married.
Where did you marry?
In Grand Rapids, Michigan. Ruth is from Grand Rapids, and married in a little church there in downtown Grand Rapids.
I understand her father was a successful dentist.
Yeah, he practiced dentistry until he was about 85 years old. Yeah.
And tell me who one of his best friends was.
Jerry Ford, Gerald Ford. Ruth's family called him Jerry. He, when he got out of the service in the Navy, right at the end of World War II, he graduated from law school at Michigan before he went into the military, and he got out of active duty, came back and started a law firm. The firm's name was Ford and Buchan, B-U-C-H-E-N. And at that time, my father-in-law and one or two of his close friends had started an organization called the Home Front, where they their objective was to rid Grand Rapids of what was a truly corrupt political machine. And the way my father-in-law tells it, they were sitting in a little drugstore or something, that he and his two friends having a cup of coffee and planning the next step in their home front operation. And he said, this young Gerald Ford walks in, and they said, well, he might be a good one for our organization. So they called him in, and he sat down and started talking about it, and he got involved with them, and they got the home front objective was very successful. And as a result of that, Jerry Ford ran for Congress, and they kept up with them literally until they died.
I know you met President Ford later on.
Mm-hmm.
You've told me about a panel you were on with him one time. But did you meet him back at that time?
I met him. He was here. I met him before he was president. I believe it was maybe 1968. During the Nixon campaign for the presidency, he was Republican leader of the House of Representatives, and he came to speak, and Ruth and I went to the airport and met him, took him to the to the event, which was at the Civic Coliseum, and took him back to the airport and had a nice visit with him. And of course, this was Jerry. You know, he's a great guy. And then he was here at a fundraiser after he was president, and we met him and spoke with him. And I guess the last time I talked to him directly was when the Sixth Circuit Judicial Conference was meeting in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And I was there. Ruth was not with me. And Jerry Ford was one of the speakers. And I gotten up that morning, as I did back in my younger days, and was jogging around the whole area there, downtown Grand Rapids, fairly early. And I got back to the hotel and in my sweaty jogging outfit, and was getting ready to get on the elevator. And the doors opened, and Jerry Ford and one or two Secret Service people came off the elevator. And in my grubby condition, I introduced myself to him again as Ruth Vermeulen's husband and so forth. And he told me what great people her parents were. And we shook hands, and he went on and gave his speech. That's the last time I talked to him directly before he died.
Before we take a break here in a moment, I'll let you tell us a little bit about your family, and then we'll go into your legal career.
Okay.
I know that you and Ruth have had 3 wonderful children.
Yeah.
Why don't you tell me about them and what they do?
We have 3 children. Robert R. Campbell, Jr., who practices law with the Waller firm in Nashville. He goes by Bo over there. I call him Bobby. Bobby will be 49 years old in a couple of days. My second child and younger son, Billy.
What kind of work does Bobby do?
He's in primarily commercial real estate development. He's kind of developed that practice over the years. He's been with Waller for I think maybe 2 years now, maybe 3 years, and has really his practice has really flourished. And of course, I'm proud of him, but I'm proud that he apparently has developed quite a reputation for his specialty over there.
I might say that my son-in-law is a member of that firm, and he tells me that Bobby, to me, is the top man in Nashville in his field, state, actually.
Yeah. He works hard, and he has some good clients, and he has a tremendous support in the Waller firm of younger lawyers and legal assistants and that sort of thing. So they're able to. There isn't anything that's too big for him to handle. In fact, Bobby was. I don't know whether he was the lead attorney or not, but Waller represented Nissan in this move from their offices in the West Coast to the Nashville area. So they were involved with that. And then my younger child, Katie, that's C-A-D-Y, named after her great-grandfather's mother, who was a Katie, and her great-grandfather was Horace Cady Wilson. And Katie was born on November 22nd, 1963, about 5 hours before President Kennedy was assassinated. And Katie was quite a marvelous addition to a family with 2 all boys, and she was an excellent athlete, tennis and basketball and even softball. Her team went to the semifinals of the state tournament in basketball her senior year. She's married to Mike Wilson, fine young man who went to Tennessee Tech with an engineering degree and a master's degree in engineering, civil engineering from Vanderbilt. And Mike, in the Nashville district of the U.S. Corps of Engineers, there are 3 uniformed officers there, and everybody else, some 200 or 300 of them, are civilian. And Mike is is the chief civilian in that, with responsibility for 200 or 300 projects in the Nashville district, and he's a fine young man and very competent, and really has reached the peak of his profession in that Nashville district. And they have 3 children.
I think you skipped the doctor in your family.
Well, yeah,
Dr.
Billy, my second one. Yeah, I'm sorry, Billy. Willard Brandt, named after his maternal grandfather. Billy's a physician. Went to undergrad school at UT, and went to medical school in Emory in Atlanta, and did his specialty training, 5 years of a residency in surgery at Emory in Atlanta. So they were there for 9 years. And while there, he and Elizabeth, his dear wife from Nashville, who he met at UT undergraduate school, had their 3rd child before he got back to Knoxville. They'd had 3 children, and a 4th one after they got back. And Billy practices here, general and vascular surgery, out at Park West Hospital.
And you have how many grandchildren?
I have 9 grandchildren. Bobby has 2. Rob, who's Robert R. III, who just graduated from MBA in Nashville and is on his way this fall to Wake Forest. Will, their youngest, who is starting going into the 10th grade at MBA in Nashville. Billy has 4. Sarah, who's 23 years old and is a graduate from the nursing school at UT and is in the obstetric department at UT Hospital now as a nurse. Kevin, who just finished his freshman year at UT, and Brandt, B-R-A-N-D-T, who will be going into his senior year at Webb, and Shay, who I think will be starting her 7th grade at Webb. Katie has 3 children. Campbell, who is going into the either the 8th or 9th grade in I can't remember the name of the school. It's in Williamson County. They live in Franklin. And Michael, their youngest, who starts the 7th grade in Franklin. And Elise, their daughter, who will be going into either 2nd or 3rd grade. Elise, a little girl that they adopted from an orphanage in Calcutta. Sweet, smart little girl.
Certainly is.
Yeah.
Bob, I think this would be a good time to take a break before we start about your career. Bob, we're back from a break, and we're going to start on your legal career now. Before we do that, when you were in law school and leaving law school, was there a placement service for you to
yeah, it was.
help you?
It was. I can't remember exactly who it was, but it was a very informal thing. There weren't a whole lot of firms using placement services in the law school at that time. One reason is that the major metropolitan areas like New York and Chicago and Houston, Atlanta, they weren't particularly interested in UT law graduates. Another reason is that in the Knoxville or the Tennessee community, as a matter of fact, there weren't very many law firms looking for young lawyers. I mean, the prospects were very, very poor for young lawyers at that time. Another thing was that I had heard later on that some of the major firms who had come to the UT Law School had soured on the idea of employing UT law graduates because they say that once they move into the big city, they want to come back to East Tennessee, and they couldn't keep them. Now that's just a rumor. I don't know if that really was true or not, but there was not an effective placement service when I got out of law school.
Well, when you started your career, did you interview or?
I didn't have any interview I had trying to practice law would have been forced by me. There weren't any law firms that were interested, literally. First off, I had a very mediocre academic record in law school. I didn't have any clients. I couldn't bring a law firm any clients. Any effort I had to any effort to join me with a law firm was strictly initiated by me. And I remember I tried my hand at what was then called Jennings, O'Neill and Jarvis, Bill O'Neill and Howard Jarvis, and Ben Williamson was with him at that time. I made a pass at Key and Lee, Clyde Key and McAfee Lee. I interviewed with Bob McConnell at France McConnell and Seymour, and there was never any interest shown at all. So I had a choice to make, and that is whether just to hang out a shingle, so to speak, and see what I could do, or to try to take a job, a salaried job of some sort that was not the practice of law.
So what was your first endeavor in the practice?
Earl Ayler, now deceased, and Joe Yancey, now deceased, had a little office down on Market Street. I think the 700 block of Market Street. And I had known Joe way back from Bearden School. So they were nice enough to put a desk up in their reception area, right across from their receptionist. And they had an old extra Underwood typewriter, and put it up there, and I bought a chair. I remember I went to S.B. Newman Office Supply Company and bought a chair and a file cabinet and some pencils and a pen or two. I bought a cross pen that I wore out, and that was about it. That was my investment in my law office, and I was there for I guess I started there probably in August or September of 1956. Ruth started teaching school, and my dad, who was with the mortgage loan department of the Fidelity Bankers Trust Company, would send me a deed to prepare every now and then, and I'd get $5 to prepare a warranty deed. And probably the first and probably the biggest fee I made while I was practicing on my own was how they came to me, I don't know, but a man and a woman who had been in an accident up in Jefferson County walked in. It might have been on a Saturday morning, and they had some scars on their faces, and they'd been in an accident. And they'd been passengers in a car that had run off the road, and so I was happy to represent them. And the driver of the car was insured by the Hartford Insurance Company. And I negotiated a settlement of that claim for a total of $1,000. And I took a $250 fee, and that was big. I probably was lucky to get $1,000 because I drove all the way to Jefferson County Hospital and talked to the doctor that had seen them when they were brought into the emergency room, and he looked at me and smiled, and he says they weren't feeling any pain at all. And I knew what that meant. So,
well, when you practiced with Earl and Joe, did they give you a draw or salary,
No.
or just give you space?
Space was all they gave me. There was no draw, and I would pick up a little business that would come into their office that they didn't want. Like in April, this would be hard for anybody to believe today, but in April I made a few bucks preparing people's income tax returns. But then after several months there, Tate Carty was practicing in the Hamilton Bank building with Jack Criss, and Jack had to leave to help with his wife's family business, had to give up practicing law. And Tate invited me to come up there, and I went up there in an office, and there I had to pay $125 a month in rent and share the use of a secretary. And that didn't work out very well. So about the time that we found out that Ruth was pregnant with our oldest child, there was an opening at Poor Cox Baker McCauley. And I went over and interviewed with J.W. Baker, and they offered me a job at $225 a month.
What year was this?
This would have, I started with them in January of 1958. And, or maybe it was February or March, but I remember very clearly that in the 16 to 18 months that I tried to practice on my own, I think I earned a gross amount of something like $1,600 or $1,700 in that period of time. As I say, Ruth was teaching school, and so fortuitously she was able to finish that school year. And I was then drawing some pay myself to help support us.
Speaking of Joe and Earl was in D-Day, if I recall.
Yeah, Earl was a fine person, a very devoted Christian, the Methodist Church here, and he went into D-Day on the second or third wave on Omaha Beach on D-Day, and he had a lot of stories to tell about that, but he wouldn't even bring it up unless you asked him about it. And Earl, you talk about the greatest generation. Earl had a brother who was killed in the South Pacific. I'm not sure which battle it was, but Ruth and I were out there in Hawaii one time. He's buried in the Punch Bowl Cemetery there in Honolulu. We found his grave marker. And Joe was, he had some military service too during the Korean War. He was over, we used to kid Joe because he served in I think it was Tripoli or Tehran during the Korean War, which got him about as far as you could get away from Korea at that time. And he and Earl had a pretty good little practice that went along for a while, and it was awfully important to me because without that opportunity, I might have ended up in a salaried job with an insurance company or a trust department of a bank, and once I started getting that regular paycheck, I would have had a hard time pulling away from it to practice law on my own. Not
to belabor the point, but I guess a good way to describe Joe Yancey was colorful.
Very colorful. And interestingly, Joe and Earl died within a week of each other.
Right.
I can't remember when, but it was close to that.
Well, when you started with Poor Cox Baker McCauley, what kind of work did you do there?
Mostly adjusting insurance claims. And it was a marvelous experience for me, going out and trying to find witnesses and interviewing witnesses and taking statements and actually settling cases, mostly automobile accident cases. I had one piece of business that kept me pretty busy for several months where a contractor out in Oak Ridge who was building houses out there right after the time when they opened up Oak Ridge for private residential construction. Went bankrupt, and I had to go out with and deal with the owners or would-be owners of those houses that were in various stages of construction, and for the bonding company, the Performance and Payment Bond Company, and that was kind of an interesting thing. And after I was there for a year or so, I got into the trial of some cases at Poor Cox Baker McCauley, and the experience I had in investigating claims really helped me all the way, literally all the way through my trial practice, and they gave me probably more responsibility for trial work than a young, inexperienced lawyer should have had. But it made had a huge positive impact on my development as a lawyer.
What, just put it in perspective, what was the average fee for adjusting a claim?
$5 an hour.
And
for true legal work, it was $10 to $15 an hour.
Okay. How long did you how long did you stay with Poor Cox?
I stayed there 4 years. I left Poor Cox in the right before Christmas of 1961. Jack Dowdy called me. I'd been in a lawsuit with Jack up in Campbell County, representing a defendant in a lawsuit where Jack represented the plaintiff. A terrible case, terrible burns, an explosion of a piece of industrial equipment of some kind. And it was not long after that Jack called me and asked me if I'd be interested in coming over and talking with him, and I did. And I went over and talked with him, and they offered me $1,000 a month, and that was quite a bit more than I was making at Poor Cox at that time.
And Jack Dowdy, of course, is Hodges, Dowdy, and Carson.
The Hodges, Dowdy, and Carson, that's right. At that time, they had Hodges, Dowdy, Carson, and John Davis. There were 4 of them there.
And the firm you're still?
Firm I'm still with in July of 2007. And I didn't just jump at it. It was a tough decision. It really was, because I was very, very happy and felt good about my situation at Poor Cox Baker McCauley. But I decided that if I was really ambitious and wanted to progress in my practice, that it was the thing to do, and I left and came with this firm on January the 16th of 1962.
And the rest is history.
Yeah, it is. And just one little sidelight on that, I've been up here in this firm for about 2 weeks, and Taylor Cox came by the office to do some work, depositions or something with Jack Dowdy, and he was telling me how much they missed me and everything. And about 2 weeks after that, Taylor Cox went into the hospital and was, as a result of that, diagnosed with liver cancer and died literally in April of 1962. And I have felt all along that, as close as I was to Taylor Cox, that if that diagnosis had occurred before I left, I would have found it hard to leave them. I would have felt that an obligation to stay with them and try to help the firm out, but I didn't.
And this was 1960?
62.
62. Tell us about your early days with Hodges Dowdy. What kind of work you did, and who was your mentor or mentor?
Yeah. Actually, if I had one mentor, it was Jim Hodges, but I had 2. Jack Dowdy was, I spent probably a little less time with Jack Dowdy, but Jim Hodges was, I don't know how old he was at that time, but he was looking awfully hard for somebody to help relieve him of workers' compensation defense work and some insurance coverage defense work. And I was there, and so he got me involved in the workers' compensation stuff. At that time, Jim Hodges was probably considered if not one of the top workers' comp lawyers in Tennessee. He traveled all over East Tennessee trying cases. And he got me into that, and it wasn't long with what he just turned it all over to me. And I spent huge amounts of time defending workers' comp cases in Knox County, but also in Hamlin County, in Greene County, and Cocke County, and some of these out counties. And then I did try some cases with Jack Dowdy as second chair in the cases. And I loved Jim Hodges. He was a very unique person, smart as he could be. And he and Jack Dowdy, when they came to town to work. Not a lot of messing around. They came to work, and when they finished working, they went to playing, fishing, and having a good time. And but Jim Hodges, I didn't learn anything about trying lawsuits from Jim Hodges. I learned about dealing with clients, and I learned the law of workers' compensation. With Jack Dowdy, I learned about trying lawsuits because he was a giant in the litigation business, and he was marvelous. One of my favorite stories about Jack Dowdy back in those days was when we were up in federal court in Greenville, when Judge Charlie Neese was fairly new on the bench up there. And we were representing in a plaintiff's case where a man named Don Rowe was hit by a train at a crossing up there. And he had been driving a car, and he actually ran into the side of the train. And he was permanently brain damaged, so he was in a wheelchair. And we tried that case actually 3 times before we actually lost the case. But the second time we tried it, we had to break for the weekend. It was on a Friday, and the engineer from the train, the defendant railroad, which was the Southern, I think, had to get back to Knoxville. And this old crusty engineer who had not testified yet, and he said, "Could I ride back to Knoxville with you?" And Adam Bowman, who was Simmons, Bowman, and Herndon law firm at that time, represented the railroad, and they said, "Sure, it's all right if you ride back with them." And so we rode back to Knoxville after that on that Friday afternoon, and this fellow was a very talkative fellow, and I don't know how the subject came up, but he was talking about the subject of moonshine whiskey came up in Cocke County and East Tennessee and all that. And this engineer said, "You know, I keep a jar of moonshine whiskey on a shelf in my closet. And before I go to bed at night, I take a cheese glass full of that and drink it, and I just sleep like a baby." And that was interesting conversation. That next week, we went on with the trial, and when this engineer testified about the accident, Jack was getting ready for cross-examination, and he whispered to me, and he said, "Should I bring up the whiskey?" And I said, "Just play it by ear." So Jack questioned him through the facts of the accident and all of that, and then finally he said, this accident occurred at about 9 o'clock one morning in Morristown. Jack said, "Now, I'll say Johnson, I don't remember his names. Now, Mr. Johnson, isn't it a fact?" And Jack was just, use his fingers like that. "Isn't it a fact, Mr. Johnson, that on the very night before this accident, you were drinking moonshine whiskey?" And he said, "Say that again." And so Jack repeated the question. And this witness said, "That ain't none of your business, buddy." And Jack says, "No further questions." And he sat down, and Jack whispered to me, he said, "I played it by ear." But Jack was a he was a master litigator, master trial lawyer.
Your practice, of course, you did a lot of, if I recall, before my time, but by history, that you did a lot of workers' comp cases and and then litigation, trial litigation. Tell me about how many workers' comp cases you might handle a week when you go to when you go in these out counties.
Yeah, we when they would. Judge John Todd up in Hamlin County, Morristown, a real interesting character. He was probably in his 80s when I was going up there. And on Workers' Comp Day, which was always the second Monday of the term, they were still going by terms up there. I'd go up there frequently with 10, 12, 13 workers' comp cases. And I would take the insurance adjuster with me, so that he could round up witnesses and make phone calls and things like that. And by the end of 2 or 3 days up there, we would probably try 4 or 5 cases and settle 4 or 5 and pass 4 or 5. And that was one of the periods of time when I worked about as hard as I've ever worked on workers' comp cases. And people used to say that trying workers' comp cases, that's not real trial work. Well, I really don't know how it is now, but back then it was real trial work. I mean, it was strictly, it was non-jury, but it was trial work. And to me it was interesting because I got where I really knew the law. I'll be immodest and say that I feel like I really knew workers' comp law. And if you go into Westlaw and under my name, I bet you would probably find 15 or 20, maybe more than that, workers' comp appellate cases that I participated in. And with Judge Todd, who would beat me around the head and shoulders very frequently in workers' comp as well as anything else, and until he found out that my grandfather Campbell had treated him for scarlet fever when he was a young man growing up in Greene County. And after he found that out, I had much better success with Judge Todd.
Tell us how your practice evolved after the first few years of doing comp work, yeah, and I guess working with Jack Dowdy, second chair. I guess I got into the more significant type of litigation in the late 60s and into early 70s. And a lot of that had to do with General Motors. We represented General Motors in everything, but one of the main things that occupied our time back there was the Corvair litigation. And it was a category of litigation that General Motors was committed to doing whatever they needed to do ethically and legally to defend the Corvair automobile. And so Jack and I spent a lot of time on those cases. We had 4 or 5 of them here. The first one we had, for a long time I remembered the name, but I remember the accident happened out on Winona Avenue off of 5th Avenue in East Knoxville. And we spent 3 or 4 days in Los Angeles working with some of the lawyers out there who had defended the Corvair cases. And we had several national meetings in Detroit with all of the counsel across the country who were defending General Motors in Corvair litigations. And I really, I learned a lot about product liability law, but also expert witnesses, and Jack gave me a lot of responsibilities on that. Another Jack Dowdy incident out at in Los Angeles. We went out one time to take the deposition of an expert out there that was going to testify on behalf of David Harney,
who was a major plaintiff's attorney. I'm sure he's probably not practicing anymore, but he had about 200 Corvair cases. And we went out to take a deposition out there, and we stopped at the offices of a local firm there who was defending General Motors and had actually tried a Corvair case that morning. It's kind of a long story, and I'll make it short, but we visited with the lawyer who had tried a Corvair case, and he was telling us about Harney and about this witness who they were familiar with. And then he said, he got on the phone and he made a phone call, and he said, "Vince, is the big table available?" We didn't know what he was talking about. He said, "Okay," and this was about 11:30 in the morning, so he said, "Let's go to lunch." So Jack and I and this lawyer, whose name I can't remember, went to lunch at this little restaurant, and we got the big table, which was in front of the TV, and we found out that what was happening was that the Los Angeles Dodgers were playing in the World Series, and so we had to sit down at the table in front of the television, and we.
I'm sorry about the interruption here.
That's all right. The business must go on. So this was in the middle of the week, and our host, the 2 or 3 lawyers from the big law firm out there, ordered a cocktail. This was 11:30, 11:45 in the morning, and so Jack ordered a martini. And I said, yeah, I know what a martini is. I've heard about it, so I ordered a martini. And I kept waiting for a server to come by and take our food order, but they never go, and we're watching the ball game. And so we had another round of drinks, and then we finally got something to eat. And about 2 hours had elapsed by then, and so we got in the car and went back to the law office. And Jack suggested to our host that they had some files of old depositions and things we wanted to read over, and Jack says, "Why don't we take those back to the hotel and read them?" So I said, "That's fine." So we stacked them up, and we went back to the hotel, and then Jack and I took a long nap after the luncheon there, and went back later on to the law firm, and they were already into their afternoon cocktails about 5 o'clock. But I kidded Jack about that later on when somebody questioned our fees, and I kidded him that maybe that he set those fees during that lunch break up there. But we worked on those Corvair cases a lot. We never tried one. We got 1 or 2 of them dismissed, and then General Motors succeeded in settling the whole batch of them with a very reasonable total amount on a lump sum settlement, and that kind of literally got me into the products liability field, and my practice developed with major emphasis on products liability into the early 70s, and literally all the way up for the rest of my career, except there were some other types of cases that I handled.
I know, since I was your partner for many years, later on you got into a lot of commercial litigation as well, and we'll talk about that in a moment.
Yeah.
Tell me some of the major cases you handled, or the types of litigation you handled after that period.
Well, one of the most difficult and significant product liability cases I handled, I call it the Victaulic case. Victaulic is a company, I don't know if they're still in operation or not, up in New England that manufactured couplings for industrial equipment, piping and that sort of thing. And at a time when the upper deck was being built at Neyland Stadium, they were using a concrete pumper which where the concrete was in a mixer and it had to pump up and then across and then down into the to provide the caissons upon which the upper deck would be mounted. And a coupling broke, and a pipe full of concrete fell down and killed one person and badly injured a couple of other people. And Victaulic was sued along with 3 or 4 other defendants. And we tried that case, I can remember, for 9 days. We were in Judge Ed Cole's courtroom, 9 trial days. And it was tough. Jack started out on that case the first day, but he was beginning to fail some at that time, and so he didn't go back. And so I finished it myself, and Earl Amon was one of the defense lawyers. Bill O'Neill and Meredith Bond were defense lawyers. Bob Pryor and Sid Gilreath represented the plaintiffs, and they ended up getting a large judgment, but my client got out, and so we won that case. Another case that a significant case that I had that was probably the most interesting case that I had through my whole career was the case of Victoria Price against the National Broadcasting Company. Victoria Price was one of the 2 women who accused the Scottsboro boys of rape on a train in northern Alabama back probably around 1930, 31. And the NBC had contracted with a production company called Tomorrow Entertainment, who had produced what I think was a marvelous television production called Judge Horton and the Scottsboro Boys. And it told the story of Judge Horton who set aside the guilty verdict of one of the Scottsboro boys at a trial in Decatur, Alabama. And it was based upon a book that had been written by Dan Carter, a Pulitzer Prize winner. He might have won the Pulitzer Prize for this book about the Scottsboro incident. He called the book A Tragedy of the American South. And in the television production, there were 2 or 3 things that were attributed to the character that was playing a lawyer or the judge that were not completely accurate. And one of the things was they said that both Victoria Price and Ruby Bates, the other women who were involved, were dead at that time. And at that time, neither one of them were dead. But NBC was sued for libel. And we tried that case after a lot of preparation. We tried it in Winchester before Judge Neese and a jury. And it was interesting. You always feel stress in a trial. I don't care what it is, whether it's a $100 trial or a $100 million trial. And I felt stress in this, but it was interesting, and I enjoyed it. And it had attracted the attention of the national media. We had media from all over the country there. The courtroom was full. And Judge Neese, after all of the proof was in, Judge Neese directed a verdict for NBC. And Dan Carter was a key witness for us. The screenwriter, a fellow named John McGreevy from Los Angeles, was a witness. And John McGreevy, he was big in the Los Angeles and the television writing, but he actually authored several of the episodes of The Waltons, which was a big production back then. And we got a directed verdict. It was appealed to the Sixth Circuit. The Sixth Circuit affirmed in a 2-1 decision, and they petitioned cert to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court granted cert. And we worked as long as the case was in the Supreme Court. We worked with Floyd Abrams, who is a well-known still First Amendment lawyer, probably as reputable as any in the country. At that time, with the makeup of the court and the concerns that NBC had about maybe getting a bad ruling, the case was settled for a very nominal amount that was confidential. But I was selfishly hoping that I'd have the opportunity to argue a case in the Supreme Court. But that was an interesting case.
I understand that the plaintiff died shortly thereafter.
Plaintiff died not long after that, and getting to know Victoria Price, her married name at that time was Street. She had been married about 4 or 5 times in her career. One of the humorous parts of the trial, when I was cross-examining her, she was talking about her marriages, and I mentioned she forgot one, and I said, how about so-and-so, weren't you married to him? I can't remember his name. And she said, oh yeah, I said, I was only married to him about 2 or 3 days. She said, we had a falling out, and I said, well, didn't you shoot him? And she said, yeah, that's what we had the falling out about. So she was a tough lady, really. I mean, I could see where she would have the kind of history that she had, but that was a very interesting case. Another interesting case that I had, apart from products liability, was in 1978, as you will remember, Lamar Alexander was elected governor, and to succeed Ray Blanton. And you also remember that in the last days of the Blanton administration, he paroled several convicted criminals, and under suspicious circumstances. And so Lamar was sworn in early, before the January 20th or whenever it was scheduled the inauguration was scheduled. And immediately upon being sworn in, he revoked the parole of these people. 2 of them sued Lamar, claiming a violation of their civil rights in revoking the parole. And so we got into a lot of interesting issues having to do with when a parole is effective, when it's an accomplished fact, not subject to being revoked. We got into the issues of qualified immunity. Judge Tom Wiseman dismissed the cases on, there were 2 cases. Herbert Tate, I think, was one of them, and Melvin Alexander was another one. So in the reported decisions, it'll be the case of Alexander versus Alexander. Judge Wiseman dismissed the cases on the qualified immunity ground. But before the dismissal, we took the depositions of Mr. Tate and Melvin Alexander. And Alexander, by then, was out of prison, and I think Tate was about to serve his sentence and be released. And it's kind of interesting that Alexander was kind of a fun-loving, hail fellow guy that I'm not sure what his conviction was for, but it was obviously a felony. And he gave the deposition, and he kind of joked around and everything. Well, the next morning's newspaper said that on his way back from Nashville to Murfreesboro, where he lived, he knocked off a 7-Eleven store. And so he was back in prison again. And we took it to the Sixth Circuit, and the Sixth Circuit remanded it on the basis of the fact that Judge Wiseman had failed to use some magic words in his opinion sustaining our motion. And so then we went back before Judge Wiseman, re-argued it, and he used the magic words this time, and it went to the Sixth Circuit, and it was affirmed. And that was a very, very interesting case. Any number of product liability cases that I tried for General Motors, for International Harvester, for the Cincinnati company that made industrial machines where people lose their extremities. I got in moving on into the 80s, as you all know, in November or February of 1983, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation closed the banks, the butcher banks. They initiated a...
It'd be 93.
Did I say 83? No, it's 93.
93.
It's 83, 1983.
83, okay, that's
Yeah.
right. That's right, okay. Excuse me.
They came in with a joint examination of all the butcher banks on the day after the World's Fair closed in 1982. And then in February the 14th, they called it the Valentine's Day Massacre. They closed some of the banks, not all of the butcher banks. They closed some of them. One of them was United American Bank here in Knoxville. And as a result of that, of course, litigation was going everywhere. And the FDIC was required to take over a lot of the loans. First Tennessee took over UAB, and a lot of the loans were not good, and the FDIC had to make good on some of them, and they ended up suing the auditor of the United American Bank as well as other banks. But I got involved representing Ernst & Winnie, who audited the United American Bank in a suit by the FDIC. That case probably took more time in a single case by far than any case I ever got involved with.
How much is involved in that case?
The ad damnum was about $450 million. And that alone certainly creates a certain amount of stress when you're defending a lawsuit. I was second chair in that case. Dan Cole, a brilliant lawyer with the Davis Polk firm in New York, was first chair, and we had a whole platoon of lawyers and assistants. We actually leased 2 floors of the old Valley Fidelity Bank building for offices and record keeping, and we tried the case in it started in November of 1991 and went until November of 1992. And in that 12-month period of time, we were in the courtroom with the jury in the box 92 days. We were there probably 40 or 50 additional days in motions and in other proceedings in the course of that trial. The case was swept up in a global settlement in November of 1992 after all the proof was in and right before we were preparing to make closing arguments in the case. And that was the toughest case that I was involved in. It was tough because of the exposure, but it was also tough that it was a little bit unfamiliar territory for me. But
did you? I understand. I can recall being your partner at that time that you worked virtually every night for months.
Oh yeah, if I got home by 9 o'clock, it was early. and every day. I mean, Saturdays and Sundays. I remember one time I calculated I had worked for something like 37 straight days.
Did you get to depose or interview Jake Butcher and C.H.
Yeah,
Butcher?
yeah. As a matter of fact, I did. Jake and C.H. were both in the minimum security part of the Atlanta prison. C.H. had gotten to the minimum security section of the prison before Jake. Jake was still in the big house, and as C.H. said, and who never lost his sense of humor, C.H. said, "Well, Jake always did have a bigger house than I did," but I spent a fair amount of time with Jake in interviewing. That was one of my responsibilities: to interview them, take their depositions, and Jake never testified, but C.H. did by video, and for me to handle that. And I spent a lot of time with C.H. And to be honest with you, I got to where I liked him. He was as smart as he could be, and he remembered everything. I never had a fact witness who remembered as much detail of years past as C.H. Butcher did. You could hand him a commercial loan application of the Bank of Somerset and say, "C.H., what's this?" It might have happened 12 years earlier. "Oh," he said, "that's a commercial loan application, Bank of Somerset, so-and-so says a good customer of the bank," so forth and so on. And one of my favorite pieces of dialogue in that trial was when the FDIC lawyer was cross-examining C.H., and we were in a room in the prison with a video camera. And he was reading answers to interrogatories that we had filed, in which we, Ernst & Winnie, had been asked to recite what we meant by the fraud, which we say caused the losses at the bank, and it was not any failures on the part of the auditors. And of course, we were saying all of the things that were done, bad things that had been done, we said, and we had proof of it, in management of the loans in the bank and so forth and so on. And the FDIC lawyer was reading that to C.H. Point by point. I mean, for 5 minutes he was reading all of these charges that we were making. And then he said to C.H., he says, "Mr. Butcher, did you do that?" And C.H. smiled and said, "Why do you think I'm here?" You couldn't do anything more to him, and he was perfectly honest about it. He says, we done wrong, we got caught, and I've got no complaints about it. So that was a tough case. It was a tough case, and frankly, I was glad when it was over.
What kind of skills do you think were and are needed to be involved in products liability cases and in heavy commercial cases like that?
Well, you have to. Obviously, you have to have a lot of patience. You have to have some intellectual curiosity to try to not only find out what the facts are, but to find out what the facts really mean. It's one thing to know what 2 + 2 is 4, but until you know why 2 + 2 is 4 and what it means, then you may have knowledge, but you don't have wisdom, and you need to make sure what it applies to. And the reason that's important is for a lot of reasons, not only to be prepared to try the case, but also to keep from going off on detours that don't mean a whole lot in the case. You need to have a lot of energy, and you need to have a wife and children that can tolerate a lot of evenings at home without their husband and daddy there. And as far as skills are concerned, I guess that the ability to think on your feet the way you have to do in litigation generally, and to try to devise a way, and most of my product liability work was defense work, although I did have a few plaintiff's cases. You have to devise a way to make a jury appreciate the defendant. You know, when somebody is killed in an automobile accident, it's not easy to make them like General Motors Corporation, but you have to try to appeal to the fairness of the jury and do so in a way that is supported by the evidence and the law. And then you mentioned stress. You have to be able to make stress work for you instead of work against you.
Speaking of defendants, I know that you and I represented some cigarette companies beginning in the 80s. Why don't you tell us about that litigation?
Yeah, we got in on the ground floor of what was then the second round of cigarette litigation. Earlier round had been probably back in the 60s when 2 or 3 cases had been tried unsuccessfully for the plaintiffs. And we got into the second round, and I guess overall we probably handled 20 or 25, 30 cases. And we tried some up to the motion stage, and we tried one, the Royston case, which is a reported case in federal court here in Knoxville before Judge Tom Hull. And it was a case involving a fellow from up in Scott County that claimed that his smoking had caused him to lose, I think he lost part of a leg, didn't he?
Correct.
Yeah. And we tried that case for a week, and got a directed verdict on it, and that was a difficult case, as are all cigarette cases, more so now probably than back then, to keep the jury from disliking the cigarette companies, big tobacco as they're called now. But the whole, the overarching approach on defense of those cases is the fact that even in the late 1800s, the Supreme Court of Tennessee talked about the evils of smoking, and the fact that, quote, everybody, close quotes, knew that smoking cigarettes was bad for you. And those were tough cases because of the consequences of it, but also very challenging and very satisfying, because you know, we knew we were right as far as our role in the case was concerned. I could go on beyond the time that we've got to talk about some of the cute things that Floyd Royston had to say to us, but he was a character, and had trouble reading the warnings on the cigarette packages, but he knew that they weren't good for him.
Bob, we have to take a break. The tape's about to run.
Okay.
We'll
Fine.
come back in a moment.
Mm-hmm.